You're listening to Unmuted Love. Hi there, I'm C. Eshelman, and with 35 years as a marriage and family therapist and 25 years as a parent of 2 children I brought home from the foster care system, I want to welcome you here to Unmuted Love Podcast, the one place where nothing is off limits to say out loud about parenting children from difficult beginnings.
Stop for a minute, stop and breathe for a minute, long it over your head, try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute, who you want to be for a minute, don't get over your head, you're like everyone else, aren't you?
Sometimes it's real sweet around here, and sometimes it ain't so pretty, because this is 100% Unmuted Love. So let's go.
You'll be just
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unmuted Love. I'm so happy to have you here because once again, we are doing part 2 of our series with Amanda Savarino, who is like a little part of me somehow. Because when she talks, I feel like I'm talking. And it's such an awesome thing because it's like, okay, I'm not alone in everything I know either. And so it's nice to have somebody know what I know, and to be able to share it with you is just the cherry on the sundae. So today we're in part 2 again, and part 2 is on shame, everybody's favorite subject, not. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you for joining me again in our series, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be back. I love our little Brave Love series. Shame's a big one. Shame is the one. It keeps you trapped, or it kept me trapped. Shame's the one that kept me locked inside the bad place for a long time.
Oh, me too. Me too. And the funny part for me is that I was writing my book in the form of a blog for a long time. And I think I was putting all the shameful stuff in the blog, but still feeling too ashamed to talk about it anywhere else. So I was talking about it to parents in my blog. But then when it came to the idea of getting help, I'm like, oh no, I don't want anybody to know. I'm like, wow, that's a little tiny bit crazy. Since I'd been sharing it for so many years in my blog.
That is so funny. So your blog, I was reading that blog. So you are the one that really, I think, gave me permission to say things out loud. I didn't know that you weren't saying those things out loud in your day-to-day life. So when I was reading your blog, I was like, look at, she's saying all the really hard, scary stuff out loud. And if she can do it, I can do it. And it's helping me so much. Like it made me feel so seen, like I wasn't the only one. I mean, honestly, really, you and Brene Brown are the reason I saw that saying the hard things out loud was actually the path out of where I was. That had a huge impact on me.
I'm really happy it did, because look at you, look where you are. And it was my intention, of course, to help people be seen in how they were. And I think it was because I wasn't feeling seen myself. And I didn't realize that it was because I was not allowing myself to be seen. I didn't put all that together, really. I think that was my way of being seen, but I was still not being seen in my own community, with like my friends and my family. I mean, I was really, really in shame. And so I was writing the blogs to be seen, because I feel like whenever you get seen, whenever behaviors that are shameful to you come into the light just cleanses them, right? It purifies the shame and it dissipates just like almost on the spot. And that's what I learned about it. So the writing was helping me dissipate the shame over time so that I could get ready to actually talk about it.
That's exactly right. You got to have like a dress rehearsal of saying it and practicing. We call it the shame fungus in our house because it thrives in the dark, right? And I think Brene Brown has talked about that a lot, about how once you bring it into the light, it can't thrive. It thrives in darkness and secrecy. So we call it the shame fungus. And we'll say it out loud. Like, oh, I'm feeling some of the shame fungus today.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to hang on to that and try to remember it because it's really good.
You can visualize it. Yeah.
I can totally see it growing in the dark. It's like, oh, yuck. Okay. All right. So what is the definition of shame versus what's the definition of guilt? I don't know if you have thoughts on that already or if you want me to jump in. So you tell me what you think.
Oh, let's hear you, the official expert. I do have thoughts. I do have thoughts. I'll tell you.
Don't pass the buck.
I'll tell you the definition that I work with, which is the one straight from Brene Brown's amazing work. Her books have helped me so much to help me understand if I'm in shame or if I'm feeling guilt, which I think get mixed up a lot, I can ask myself, am I feeling like what I did is not okay? The action or the word is not okay? Or am I feeling like I am not okay as a person? And if I'm feeling like I am not okay, I'm flawed, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm like irredeemable, that's shame. That is isolating and rigid. And guilt. What I did is not okay. There's a path forward there. That's an action, and you can make changes and come up with a plan and make a repair. So that is what I work with when I'm thinking about it.
You didn't need an expert to tell you that, because that is really what I say too. Guilt is about something you have actually done, and shame is about who you are.
Yeah.
If you have actually done something, you can repair that. If you feel guilt and you've done something, you can repair it with someone. You can at least forgive yourself for it, even if the other person won't accept your repair. But shame is different. It's like, can't repair from shame because your entire self is shamed, and therefore it's not repairable, right? You're just bad at the core somehow.
Right. You feel like you're innately not good enough. And where do you go? Where can you go from there?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think listeners might be like, why are they talking about shame? How does that connect to part 1, which was on blocked care? Well, there's a natural link for us, those of us who work in this field with parents, because shame is just such a big deal. And I know Amanda and I both felt a lot of shame, which we just shared, but it's also true of most of the parents we begin to work with, that shame has kept them in the dark and kept them from getting help. And if you are kept from getting help for long enough and you stay drowning for long enough, you become blocked. And so the shame gets all tied up. So that's why we went from blocked care to, the thing that kind of holds blocked care in place and keeps you from getting help is shame. So we thought, well, let's talk about it. Let's just bring it out into the light. So here we are.
Yeah. I feel like the natural place to start with making that connection between blocked care and shame for me, and just the practical path of getting help, was this fear of being found out, feeling so ashamed of the person or parent I felt like I had become, how far I had gone from the way I thought parenting was going to look. I was so ashamed of where I was. The thought of having someone else find out how bad it was in our house and in my relationship with my son, and really all the relationships in my house, was terrifying to me, because I felt like the only person. I felt so alone. I felt like any therapist or adoption group or anyone would look at me and say, you're a terrible person and there's no hope. This child will never be okay while you're their parent. That's how I felt.
Oh, me too. Me too, so much. I actually believed that I was shameful. And I didn't realize that when I brought my children home, that what was getting activated was my shame from childhood that I didn't even really totally realize I was carrying. Although I knew about it, I just never put 2 and 2 together. I feel like, wow, would I have my head stuck in the sand or something? Possibly. I had a lot of shame from childhood, and I used to joke about myself and say, oh yeah, shame is my middle name, before I had kids. But I didn't do anything about it. I just knew that my parents' favorite parenting technique was shame, right? To get me to not do something bad was to shame me if I did something bad. But what it did was it brought me forward with just like a whole lot of shame, made me like, oh, I got to be good all the time. I've got to be doing good. I got to figure out, first of all, what is good. And secondly, I got to do it. And if I don't do it, then I have to feel ashamed. Anytime I felt selfish, I felt ashamed. Anytime I put myself first, then I felt ashamed. Anytime I did something that was just not nice, then I felt ashamed. Anytime, I don't know, I had a negative thought, I felt ashamed. I mean, it was like shame was my middle name. But I've been battling that for a long time. And so when I got my kids, I didn't realize how they were going to activate that shame that was just my middle name when I was getting to them. And it had become almost like my entire self-description. It's like, well, I am shame now because of the way I was parenting. I didn't know how to parent, and I was definitely not being the parent I thought I would be. And I definitely had judgment. And the judgment was, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I was.
I identified deeply with this whole story, which may be why we have a similar outlook on all of this. But that's the same. For me, it was very similar. It was like, oh, look, there's proof that you're as bad as you think you are. Look, you just did it again. See, you can't be trusted. Oh, and that was the whole parenting journey for me with my second child. My first child, I hadn't had to confront those things yet. And so a lot of my coping and the way that I got out of being stuck in shame was to blame my second child for my lack of parenting skills, right? Because I was like, well, it wasn't this hard to parent your brother. It must be you, right? So that was, as Brene Brown says, like, you will seek all of the most comfortable solutions to your problem before you actually pursue the one that's going to fix your problem. So that was more comfortable to blame him than it was for me to deal with my shame. Like you're saying, I was just drowning in shame. I had convinced myself long ago that I was a bad person.
So I remember that phase too. And I was ashamed of what I was doing when I was blaming my children. I did blame my children. I thought it was them. The only reason I'm behaving like this is because you're behaving like that. And I really thought that. It wasn't like an excuse or anything. It was like I really believed what I was thinking. But then I felt really ashamed still of what I was doing and that I was blaming these little children for my bad behavior when I finally started to come out of it, right? And realize, wait, it can't possibly be a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old that's causing me to behave like a maniac, and in such an unkind and fierce way with a 2 and a 3-year-old. Why would I be doing that? So blaming them just added to the shame.
Exactly. I'm curious if you experienced this too, but I had this like enlightenment phase where it started to occur to me that it wasn't the 2-year-old's fault that our life was as bad as it was. And I started to realize it, right? And probably I always had an inkling, but I started to really start sitting with it. And it was such a scary thought to me, the amount I was going to have to change and grow, that I shut that down real fast. Put that back in the box as fast as I could. Of course, once you start going down that path, it keeps popping up. I ran from it as fast as I could. It was the scariest thought in the world to me, probably for more than one reason. One, I had no idea who to talk to about anything like this. No one seemed to exist that could help me. And I didn't know anyone, or I didn't think I knew anyone. And no one was like out about living a life this hard. It was almost too big and too scary to tackle, right? There was no parenting group. There was no therapist that understood. So even once I did start to see it, I couldn't deal with it.
It's sort of like that thing where once you realize something, you can't go back. That's what it was for me. Once I realized, oh, this is wrong to blame these children this way. And I have to look at myself. Like, what the heck is going on with me that I would behave like this? Like, it defied my self-definition, who I thought I was. Like, I was like, I don't know who I am. This is not who I thought I was. But once I started down that path, I was like, yeah, I can't go back. Now I just got to go forward and understand, like, what am I doing and why am I doing it?
And then the curiosity and the determination. Yeah, it took me a while to get there. It was too scary. I feel like this all sounds so daunting. We should talk about.
There's hope. We got out of it. We don't feel it anymore. There's a way out. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it's good though for us to come out of the closet about the shame because, I think everybody has some shame in the closet. And if we're not talking about it, nobody's talking about it because it's so hard to talk about. So sorry, all, if it feels daunting. Amanda and I have come out on the other side with way less shame. As a matter of fact, we've learned, I think both of us, and I just know this from talking to Amanda, that we've both been able to find compassion for ourselves and to forgive ourselves for what we didn't know. And also, in my case, I made amends to my children early on, and I continued to make amends to them when I wasn't perfect. That was the antidote ultimately for shame, is that I owned my behavior and I did my best to change it. And when I wasn't able to fully change it, I owned it and repaired with my kids. That was everything for me. I can feel good about myself and I'm not pretending that it was them and not me.
100%. So it's funny. I have a little list of words I want to make sure just reminder words, and repair and antidote are both on my list. My antidote was honesty and normalizing. That's what I have next to the word antidote. It's normalizing that not just me, but also my kids are doing the best we can with what we know. And that this is as hard as we think it is. I'm not exaggerating how hard this is, and neither is my child exaggerating how hard it is for them. And so I had to normalize both of the experiences. And once I could accept that, yes, what I'm doing is as hard as I think it is, that's where self-compassion started to come in. And when self-compassion started to come in, I started to be able to make a little space in myself for forgiveness of previous egregious parenting mistakes, being way outside of who I wanted to be. That's such a great thing to talk about, is there is a path forward. There's an antidote. There's repair. There's self-compassion. There's creating space for yourself to actually experience the emotions that you've been avoiding for how long.
Mhm. So yeah, and once you start having self-compassion, the compassion I had for my children became exponential.
Yeah.
When I wasn't having any compassion for myself, I didn't have much for them either. It's like, well, I had it hard too, kids, buck up.
Yeah. I would say things like, you're never going to survive in this world if you can't handle eating lunch, like, come on. Because I was so scared because of the things that were too hard for me. Yeah. And I couldn't tolerate it in my kids. It was so vulnerable and scary to see it in them because I hadn't forgiven myself for all the things I struggled with. That was such a hard thing. And I still do it. Now though, I've been able to make this switch after years and years of practice, where if my kids do something that triggers a lot of discomfort in me, I can be not thankful. I won't say thankful, but I can be in a space of, oh, this is a clue, right? This is a clue, because that means that there's something in me that doesn't feel comfortable in this situation because of unresolved stuff for me. And getting to the place where you see that your discomfort is your responsibility, that's freedom right there.
Right. It's such freedom. It's so relieving, right? It relieves us from so much suffering when we start owning ourselves and realizing, like, it's only when you own yourself that you can make changes. You have power once you recognize that it's your responsibility. People often, I think, say in front of me that, he made me feel XYZ. And I'm like, well, people generally can't make you feel something unless they're punching you in the nose and then they're making you feel that pain. But, the general feelings we're feeling, we're feeling because it's who we are and how we're experiencing it. And we actually have the power to change how we're seeing it and experiencing it if we own it.
I had such low emotional intelligence, like literacy. I didn't even understand, I don't think, that emotions pointed to an internal experience. To me, emotions were other people's fault. Anything I felt was caused by other people. The outside world was to blame. Like if I'm having a bad day or if something's hard for me, I would think, what are they doing to make me feel this way? And I wasn't raised in a house where we thought about the internal experience at all. But I didn't even know until people started saying things like, where's that in your body? What kinds of things is that bringing up for you? And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you're even saying. And then I remember telling my kids, I think they're called feelings because you feel them. My kids were like, okay. But it's so funny. I just wasn't raised in that world. It didn't occur to me. It was all very new. Of course, I couldn't teach it to my kids because I didn't know it myself. But once I learned it, that was the path forward.
Yeah. And that, that's a big part of helping our kids heal is using reflection, right? Like, oh, when you hit your brother, what were you feeling inside? Did your chest hurt? Were your fists doubled? Were you sweating? What was happening? And a lot of times kids who come from difficult beginnings, they'll say, oh, I felt it in my head. And I'm like, well, I think that's a thought. So let's see if next time you feel like hitting your brother, you could check in and see what might be happening in your body too. So that's the sort of step-by-step piece, right, of figuring it out. And sometimes it starts with the parent. And then the parent, once you start getting better at that, you can go, oh, my kids need to know this too, helping them.
That was the beginning of getting out of shame because once I had that piece, I had more knowledge for those difficult moments. I was sort of working from nothing, trying to white knuckle myself through moments where I was doing things that weren't in alignment, where I was trying to use control to avoid emotions. I was trying to control my children with being big, being loud, being rigid, so that I didn't have to explore why I felt how I felt. But once I learned to identify feelings in my body, to identify what my fear was that was bringing all this emotion, what was the story I was telling myself, then I could see a way of doing it differently. But until I had that information, I didn't see any other way to parent. I didn't see another path. I was just trying to white knuckle it. But when you don't have any tools, you're just stuck in a circle. You're just round and round you go. You do something you're not proud of, your kid's backed out, you feel ashamed, you just keep going round and round.
Right. It's a negative feedback loop and you're just stuck in it.
Yeah.
That sort of makes me want to just explore control a little more, what the role of trying to control all this is and how it holds different kinds of things in place, right? So not just trying to manage behavior through control. I remember thinking, I just need to put the fear of God in these children. And I don't even know what that meant because I'm not that kind of religious, but it meant scare them. I was scared of my mom. they're not scared of me, and they must be scared of me. I must make them scared of me. So I was trying to control them into being afraid of me. And I'm like, whoa, okay, that's not really right, probably. But
I had no
it's all I had. I didn't have any tools.
That's exactly right. I had no other framework for parenting. To me, fear was the only effective parenting tool, unless you just lucked out and got really good kids who just listened all the time, which I didn't seem to ever find. So I didn't know any other way. That's exactly the same. I just thought I must not be being firm enough, consistent enough, rigid enough. I was erring in the other direction. I need to be more and more and more of this big, scary person, which left me feeling worse, worse, worse.
Yeah,
and it
me
obviously
too.
wasn't effective at all. Yeah.
Me too. So tell me what your thoughts are on what you experienced around control and how that fed shame.
For me, control was about avoiding emotions and feelings. It was about making other people not make me uncomfortable. So to me, control was about avoiding discomfort. And it wasn't just my kids' behavior. You know, maybe in the beginning it was my kids' behavior, but it grew to like my partner, to my appearance, to the way my home looked, because the more and more I felt out of control and scared, the more things I tried to control. And it was a downward spiral, because the more I tried to control things, the less I felt in control of myself. I just kept lashing out, saying things, doing things I wasn't proud of, and it caused me to pull away. Obviously, it's a really convenient buffer when you're always worried about how clean your house is. You don't have to worry about if you have a good relationship with your kids. I spent a lot of time and attention on control and not feeling things. And I was deeply ashamed of how I was prioritizing all these things that didn't matter. I felt so much shame about the focus that I had on the way my kids looked and acted and were perceived by the outside world. That was so important to me. And I knew in my soul, in my, the part of me that understands what's important in the world, that this was not a good place for me to be focusing. But it felt like the only way your parenting skills get assessed is by the way your kids are acting and the way that your kids look. So I couldn't get them to be the way I wanted them to, so I controlled all the appearances.
Which it kind of comes around to like sort of the expectations of parents, what it's supposed to look like. And we all have internalized, I don't know, some movie version of good parenting, and we're trying to look like it, especially when things are falling apart on the inside and we don't really know what we're doing, and it just feels like we're all drowning, and at least we can make it look good. So then we have lots of examples in our culture, right, about what looking good is, but it's all just like an airbrushed woman on a magazine. That's not a realistic woman, right? Real women don't generally look like an airbrushed magazine cover.
No. Most of us have like, a zit or a weird eyebrow. We're not those. Right. We're not those women on the magazine covers, especially if I wasn't.
They're not those women either. They're airbrushed.
They're not there either.
So the parallel is, though, that we try to look like we're good parents, and that requires controlling how people look and how they act and what we say about them and whether we come out into the light. Because I think what that's doing is keeping our true selves in the dark, and it's bringing forward just an image that we are hoping people will buy. And, sometimes people do.
Sometimes. It's funny, though, the people that know, the people that have been there, they can always see through it. Yeah. So for me, control was also kind of one of the beginning steps to a better mental state, a better connection. Releasing control had to be one of the very first steps. And it was terrifying. It was handing over control to my spouse in parenting decisions. It was my house not always looking perfect. It was my kids beginning to have some autonomy, which was deeply embarrassing for me and very hard, because I had to start looking at me, like my own self. Why is this so hard for me to let them be who they are and say what they're going to say and look how they're going to look? But it also was the beginning of me having space in my life. If you're micromanaging everything 24 hours a day, you don't have time to take care of yourself. And if you don't have time to take care of yourself, you don't have time to process your feelings and to figure out what brings you joy and to have that counterbalance to how hard it is to parent these kids. So it's all intertwined, or it was for me.
So much is intertwined around the shame. I know one of the things that I was afraid of was getting caught or found out as a bad parent or as doing things that were hurtful to my children. I was ashamed of that one, and I was also scared. Right. So, I was controlling that too, like whether or not anybody could really know, because I was afraid that if they did know, then I would get into trouble too. Not only would I be drowning and, feel so ashamed and feel terrible and out of control and all the things, and my kids were feeling that way too, then I would actually end up with some kind of really horrible thing happening, where now my kids are going to be taken away and, I might have to go to jail and, that's how my brain went. It was like totally in this cycle of, woo, crash.
Yeah, I called it circling the drain. Just
Totally.
This was a big moment. The first time we sought out therapy, we didn't have good luck, but we kept trying. And the first time we found a therapist where my son was going to be going to therapy appointments on his own, someone who I felt actually trustworthy, who actually understood and they weren't going to cause more damage than help us, I was going to leave him there and he was going to talk to them without me. That was one of the scariest things I ever did. And I then had to pick him up. By then, I knew better than to just pepper him with questions. What did you say? What happened? What did he say? I had progressed that far. But of course, in my mind, that's all I can think about. But I had gotten to the point where it was worth it. I was so afraid for my son's mental health and well-being that I had gotten to the point where it didn't matter anymore if I got in trouble or if someone thought I was a bad person. But I had to get pretty scared for him, for his mental health, before I was willing to break the seal and take the risk.
Same thing for me. It's like, well, these kids just need help though. And I don't know what it is. And so I've got to just come clean and not be so afraid and just see what happens. And nothing happened.
Nothing at all.
I mean, I just got help. I just got help. I mean, I had a hard time getting help because I went from one kind of not very good helper to the next not very good helper, because this was a long time ago and trauma-informed therapy was not really a thing. It's a little easier today, although you can still have to shop around quite a bit to find somebody who really understands what's going on. But I did need help for my kids, and I went far and wide to find it. I went to trainings all over the world to learn about attachment and trauma. Luckily, I was a therapist, so I could get in the doors to those things and hear the inside. I read all the books. And then I finally did go to therapy myself when the trauma was just right in my face. Oh, this is about my trauma and it's intersecting with my kids' trauma. Okay, got to get some help.
That's an important step too. It's not just about helping your kids and biting your tongue, right? It's also, you really won't find peace until you go out and find the person that can help you. And that was hard for me, just to find someone who understood adoption, who wasn't saying things to me like, oh, they're so lucky to have you. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to find somebody else, because I'm going to have to spend a lot of sessions educating you, and I don't have the money or the time to do that. So that was a big one, is part of letting go of control and creating a little bit of space in my life to actually take that hour and find that therapist, or those many hours. Just give myself that little window of space to understand myself a little bit better, so that when my kid did something and something came up in me, I'd be like, oh, we talked about that in therapy. That's this wound. We don't need to respond. It's not important to respond to everything that makes us uncomfortable. The process of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which was a new skill for me as an adult in my 30s, came through therapy. I didn't know anything about that or how to do that, or that I even was supposed to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That was brand new information for me. I thought I was supposed to do something about it. So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable came from therapy. And then that's when I was able to parent more in alignment with myself.
When I got better, I did get better and did my work and helped my children, began really helping my children, because I was a therapist. I started putting together, the concept of the Love Plus parenting model, which it's really about phases, right? And so when I was creating the Love Matters Parenting Society, I built it around these phases, which is, help parents look at themselves first. So that's phase 1. Help them see themselves, help them face their shame, help them understand what happened to them. So looking at their coherent narrative, making it coherent, looking at the adverse childhood experiences they may have experienced, or even adult traumas that they had that got them to the place they're in. So doing their work first, phase 1. Phase 2, looking at, what happened to the kids? And how to look through the right lens so that you're using the right tools in the right order at the right time. Learning those tools, that's phase 3, right? And really becoming an expert in therapeutic parenting and an expert in calming your nervous system, and realizing that co-regulation is the answer, right, for kids is to help them co-regulate, which requires you to be able to regulate, which means you have to do your own work. And then lastly, just getting very comfortable in your own skin with the fact that the fourth phase in the Love Plus Parenting model is really settling into your expertise, that you know your family, you know yourself, you know your kids, and you know therapeutic parenting, and you know your family, and you know what's best for them, and you can advocate for them, and you feel good enough inside. The shame has dissipated, and you have made peace with who you are and who your kids are. You've radically accepted who they are, and you move into living, a life you love. And it takes a while, but it happens when you do the work and you understand the process. I'm saying this right here, right now, because we're coming to the end of this particular session, and I want to assure all of you who are listening, if you are just at the beginning, or if you're in this shame phase, beware that there are processes that work, that help you move through it and get to the other side and actually begin to enjoy your life with your kids, right? With your kids. And sometimes I think at the beginning, I really thought that was never, ever going to happen, that I was ever going to be able to enjoy my life or my kids again. Like that was just not going to happen. But I was wrong. And I'm glad I was wrong. And, I had to figure it out. And I'm glad I was able to, just like you, Amanda.
That was beautifully said and so important. That's finding the path, finding the resources and the people and the connections. That was the final thing that I wanted to talk about, is finding people, but finding the right people. It's easy to get in a community where everyone is stuck in shame and it's actually reinforcing where you are and it feels very dark, but finding the people who are making the effort to move to the next step or are showing you the path like you do in your beautiful parenting group, that's vital. That's the beginning right there.
It really is the path. It's just the path. It's the end, the beginning and the end. It's beginning with the end in mind, actually. So it's lovely.
Thanks, C.
You are welcome. Thank you for coming here today and doing part 2 of your series. This is your series inside my series, which is kind of funny. But I love it. I love that we're doing this together, and I'm looking forward to when we come back with part 3.
Part 3. This is a perfect segue because part 3 is finding community. So
there you go.
This is it. You brought us right there.
All right, cool. So just so you all know that there will be some resources in the show notes for today. Amanda's putting them together for you, and she's really good at that. So she's really scoped out the best resources, and they are truly helpful. So make sure you take a look at those. And if you find yourself here, you'll be able to find yourself out with some of those resources. So thank you again, Amanda, for joining me here on Unmuted Love, where nothing is off limits when we're talking about children from difficult beginnings. Hey parents, this is C. Get the help you need to end destructive and chaotic behavior in your home while parenting children from difficult beginnings. I know you need help, and the Love Plus parenting model actually works. I'm inviting you to work with me personally for 6 months in my virtual therapeutic parent program, and I guarantee you results, or 100% of your investment back. How is that for a blue ribbon deal? I'm looking forward to working with you. See you on the inside.
Stop for a minute. Stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head. Try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute. Who you want to be for a minute. Don't get over your head. You're like everyone else, aren't you? You could gain from being a bit nicer.
The Unmuted Love podcast is hosted by me, C. Eshelman, Attachment and Trauma Specialist at the Attach Place in Sacramento, California. Our podcast producer is the amazing Saya Clark, and our theme song is Nicer by Houses on the Hill, licensed through Epidemic Sound. Thank you for being such loyal listeners here on Unmuted Love. I'll see you all next week.
You'll be just fine.